Snow came quiet to the camp in the Wolf's Wood, a sift of white that dimmed the sound of iron and boot leather and set a thin coat on the rolled walls of hide and patched cloth. John stood beneath the drooping branches of a fir, his breath a pale fog, and listened to the distant creak of wagons, the murmur of men, the slow shuffle of shaggy northern horses stamping against cold. A lantern swung from a pole outside the largest tent and sent a yellow lick across the snow, the light fighting the dark the way a campfire fights the night, stubborn but outmatched. Inside, the air held warmth from a brazier and the smell of smoke, wool, and old leather. Davos Seaworth sat near the coals, rubbing his hands and thumbing unconsciously the place where some fingers were not, eyes steady as if reading the room the way he'd read a ship's deck. Every tilt, every knot. Tormund Giantsbane sprawled on a stool too small for him, fox fur cloak thrown back, hair like a flame that had refused to go out with the summer. He drank from a horn and eyed the entrance as if the tent was a cave and he had an old quarrel with any new gust of wind. Sansa came through the hanging with a sweep of snow off her shoulders. She had not put on a lady's expression to face them. Her cheeks were flushed by cold, her eyes clear and hard when they found Jon. She always held herself as if she'd been taught each bone's purpose. There was something in the set of her mouth that made him think of winter roses and steel. "Your ravens found me," Jon said. He had no way to write what it was to stand with her again, with the weight of a keep neither of them had seen safe in years pressing against the backs of their thoughts. "My ravens found more than you." Sansa's gloves creaked as she pulled them free. When Davos proffered his seat, she shook her head and remained standing, close enough to the brazier that heat caught the hem of her cloak. "I spoke to someone who wanted to speak to me." Tormund made a noise like a bear's interrogative grunt. "If it's more friends in Fancy Tin, I'll be glad to know where to put our men so they don't get trampled." "It is," Sansa said. She looked to Jon. "The Vale has answered." Jon raised his head, feeling the steadiness he'd been hoarding in his chest shift, the way ice shifts when a lake thaws beneath it. "How many?" "Enough." There was no tremor in Sansa's voice. "Anya Waynwood sent word. Lord Yohn Royce, too. They rode at Peter Baelish's urging, though I've told them what you and I told each other. Winterfell is ours, and we will not trade one false lord for another. They are not far." Tormund snorted. The little lord with the sharp eyes and softer words. "You trust him?" "No," Sansa said simply. "But I trust the Vales need to burnish its honor and their wish to be on the right side of the tale that will be told." Davos' mouth bent. "Stories are cheaper than bread and last longer. If the Vale has come, we should use them right." Jon had not thought the world would deliver him this, since the list of their houses had come back so thin. A Mormont's spark, a Hornwood's whisper, and Umber's failure. He'd been looking at the map with his jaw set and the ache in him like the old ache had come back. The cold hall, the eyes on him as if he were not quite there. He had seen the way Ramsay would play him and he had almost resigned himself to it. The Vale's riders would change the game, but not if they rushed half-digested to slaughter. "Tell me," he said. Sansa looked at him a long moment. It was the same look she had given him when she had told him his name was not Stark but meant Stark things anyway. "We cannot meet him on ground of his choosing. He will try to taunt you into it. He will use people, he will use Rickon, he will make a game of it, and he will try to make the game look like the only way out." Jon felt the name like a blade pressed against his ribs. "If he brings Rickon into the open." "He will do it to bait you," Sansa said, eyes not flinching. "If we run to it, we will give him everything. If we hold, he must come to us. He cannot bear to be slighted. He will ride because he must. If we line the ground with pitfalls and promises he doesn't see, if we hold your men from the charge until their horses are broken, we can spend his malice and not our blood." Davos leaned forward, the fire painting the planes of his face. Pitfalls. Jon saw them in his mind. Trenches dug where snow could swallow their edges, stakes hammered into frozen earth, lines of fire to make a corridor, and heavy riders funneled like cattle. The wildlings could build such things. They'd lived with hard land and harder men. "We'll need days." He has eyes. "The Karstarks will be ranging. The Umbers, whichever Umber now carries the name. Then we make him look at what we want him to see, Sansa said. We send him false numbers. We make our camp sprawl and our fires look scattered. We leave him a letter. I will write it. He will think he has won. Then we let his pride do work for us. You think like a crow who learned the ways of foxes, Tormund said, grinning in spite of himself. I like it. Jon met Sansa's eyes. And the Vale. They will not be the rescue that arrives at the last possible moment because we have failed to plan, Sansa said. And Jon caught the shard of rebuke in it and accepted it, because it was his to take. They will be in place before any horn sounds. Royce can hide men along a ridge line to the south of the Long Barrows. The snow is our Vale. When Ramsay's riders are in the throat of the field, the falcons will cut their wings. Davos nodded slowly. A hammer and anvil. If we can make them charge where we've cut their horses' legs out from under them, we won't need to pay in bodies. But the men must hold. Wildlings don't like standing still when they want blood. Tormund rolled his shoulders. My folk will listen to me if I tell them you're not rushing like a spear-first fool. And because he red woman isn't here to spook them. We stood in lines at the wall and bled slow because you said we had to. We can do it again. Jon listened to the crack of the brazier and heard in it the peal of an iron gate closing on a plan. We do it, he said. We do it all the way. Outside, the snow fell, steady as a heartbeat, covering prints and the old dead leaves, laying its thin mercy across the ground where men would walk. Peter Baelish came the next afternoon, a flicker of summer silk and clever eyes in a winter world. He rode under the Vale banners, falcon and moon, with Lord Yohn Royce a breastplate of burnished gray at his side and Anya Waynwood's riders fanning the edges like a shield. The Vale horses were well-shod and breathed plumes. The men's cloaks were clean and their faces ruddy with health. They looked like a solution carved from money and patience. Arya told Sansa long ago that men like Baelish were small in the way snakes were small. Jon thought of it now, watching Peter dismount with a flare of cloak. The man bowed to Sansa as if she were a queen in a hall instead of a sister in a tent. My lady, he murmured, voice pitched soft. You asked for my help and you have it. Jon stepped forward without titles. We asked for the Vale, he said. Not for the strings that often come with it. Royce's mustache twitched as if a smile wanted to be born and remembered itself in time. Peter's eyes slid to Jon and back to Sansa as if Jon were a servant speaking out of turn. The Vale answers to its lords, Sansa said, and if there was a blade in her tone, she did not bother to hide it. And those lords have put their men under my command for this field. You will obey Lord Royce in dispositions and me in the aim. If you wish to be thanked later, we may talk. If you wish to be a problem now, you can ride away. Baelish spread his hands, the gesture of a man ready to be generous. I wish to see you safe in your home, he said, a line that had bought him many doors. How I accomplish that matters less. Royce's voice was iron. I don't take orders from knife men. Lady Sansa, show us the ground and the plan. Davos brought out the map, and before it could become a table to argue over, Jon turned it to a thing to agree upon. He traced the low rise south of the Barrows. He marked the stretch of wolf pine where they could cut stakes and bury them. He drew a corridor wide enough to take a cavalry charge and narrow enough to pop a formation like a gut over a fence. He pointed out the shallow stream now frozen to iron, where horses could find broken footing. He marked the half-frozen bog to the west, a treachery edges by birch that would look like clean country to eyes from the Dreadfort. He drew with his finger in the frost, dusting the tabletop the shape of a mouth, and how to make Ramsay ride into it. Ravens, Sansa said, taking up a quill. I need the maester's hand so the letters look timid and the seals look afraid. Wolkin is at Winterfell. He is a careful man but not loyal to Bolton for love. We offer the garrison safe passage if they open the gate. No pillage, no taking of fingers. Tormund grunted assent. We take no fingers we're not owed. And their lord to face trial, Sansa finished. The offer must be honest or the men will feel the lie and choose fear instead. We also let Ramsay know we have very few men, and that we will march at dawn to the Weeping Water because we cannot endure his arrows at our backs. Will he believe it? Royce asked. "He will not read it that carefully," Sansa said. "He will read contempt. He will read the means to win early, and he will ride." The work in the days that followed had a rhythm. Men with shovels carved teeth into frozen ground. Wildlings with big shoulders lifted timbers and dragged them to the lines marked out with twine. Davos paced the corridors they were drawing in the open earth and checked angles the way a sailor checks for a reef. Where will the hull scrape if the water drops? He made them widen some lines and narrow others so the great mass of a charge would follow the lie of the land rather than its own will. Jon walked among the men and felt the tops of their rough heads, the brittle courage in them, the way hunger had made their eyes quick. He spoke to small clusters, never to all at once, because a man in a group will pretend to believe, but a man with two friends will tell you the truth if he trusts you. At night, Sansa wrote until the curve of her hand ached, pressing her seal with careful thought, matching the wax she remembered from Winterfell's stores so the color would not betray the letter before an eye could. She chose words like a woman setting cups for a stranger, filled for courtesy, not for joy. She knew what fear looks like on the page because she had written to it and from it and sometimes with it in her mouth. She wrote not as a Stark but as someone who had learned the ways of stairs with knives behind them. Baelish drifted like a house cat from tent to tent, saying soft things to men who had not been loved. He found Sansa in the glow of her candle and smiled as if he had brought her a gift. "Your father would be proud," he said, which was the same as saying, "I know the right door to knock upon in your heart." Sansa did not look up from her page. "My father was proud before his head left his shoulders," she said. "Pride is not the measure." She sealed another letter. "If you would be useful, ride a strong horse and take this to Wolkan yourself, and look him in the eye, and tell him Lady Sansa Stark offers mercy to every man within those walls who is not named Bolton or has not put a Stark to harm with his own hands. Tell him the North belongs to itself, and a man who chooses the North will not be turned away when this is over. Tell him the kitchens will be stocked and the kennel master will keep his dogs on leashes." Peter's brows tilted. "You will forgive the kennel master? I will give him work and a wa." "Chman," Sansa said. She looked up then, and her eyes had more winter in them than the night beyond the tent. "Mercy is not forgetting. It is choosing who we will be when our enemy is gone." Baelish bowed and took the letter with a mouth that wanted to smile and an eye that did not. He left and did as he was bid, and if he added a word to Wolkan beyond Sansa's message, the maester did not report it later. He brought back Wolkan's reply, a precise note acknowledging receipt, the hand neat as if meant to soothe. It did not pledge betrayal. It did not swear to anything, which was, Jon thought, as much as one could ask for now. The morning the snow broke and the world shone like a blade, a Bolton rider was seen on the rise. He carried a black banner with white flayed man dancing bloody on it, and behind him their scouts flitted like crows. Davos let them see the untidy sprawl of tents, let them count half the fires, let them watch the wildlings bicker as if they were all impatience and no plan. The rider went back at a canter. "He'll come," Sansa said. He missed the bear's roar and the kraken's curl and the dire wolf moving across a field of white. He missed the men who had gone to walls and never come back. He stood it there for so they could feel his back in front of them and not see whatever flickered across his face. Snow still drifted at intervals as the day climbed, a forgetful sky letting down a handful of white. The ground had been broken where they broke it. The lines of their traps were smooth and flawless as sewing done by a mother with a patient hand. Nothing to catch the eye, everything to catch a horse's knee. Ramsay came at mid-morning, his riders bright as knives. The Karstark banner snapped in the wind like a curse. The Umbers rode with spears level and expressions that would have fit funeral pyres. A crescent of archers moved like a flock. The flayed man grinned obscenely over them all, and at their center rode the Lord of Winterfell by false oath, smiling as if every piece had moved as he had planned. He did not bring Rickon to the field. Jon felt the tension twist in him and then felt the relief that he would not be forced into a choice that would cost them both. A rider came forward under a flag of parley. Davos met him in the no-man's land and returned with a roll of parchment. Ramsay's hand, thin, elegant, practiced, It said all the things a cat says when it has pinned a mouse and is inventing poetry about it. It offered terms that were not terms, clemency that was a joke, mercy that was a lie. Sansa took the parchment and let the fire lick the corner until it curled and blackened, and then she held it by the unburned edge until the script went to ash. "He writes too much," she said. The horn sounded from Bolton's line. The movement began. A slow, sure roll. Jon did not move his men. He let Ramsay's riders stretch to their full gallop, let their formation tighten to a spear point. They were aiming at ragged wildlings on the left because ragged things are easier to cut and because the left-hand slope hid the first of the dug pits so cleanly. Jon had chosen it for beauty, not malice, because horses expect grace from a field that looks like that and will stumble worse when it isn't there. "Hold," he said, and Tormund echoed it in a roar that was not a roar of the wild, but something older. The men's spears quivered and steadied. Davos stood like a mast. The charge hit the first pit and it was as if the earth had chewed. Nails driven into cut logs found soft pasterns and delicate joints, and horses screamed high and sudden, and the lines behind could not stop because momentum is a god. Men went down still gripping reins and then couldn't let go of them because shock turns hands to stone. The second line fanned instinctively to avoid a trap they hadn't seen, and in fanning they met the bog that had looked like clean ground. The first sign a rider had that he was in it was the feel of water glossed with ice just beneath, and then the way his horse's hindquarters gave. They slowed, swore, fought their mounts, and in slowing made themselves meet. "Now," Davos said low. Jon tipped his head, and the boys with torches he had set along the trench struck flint to tinder. Flames ran in hard lines, making offensive heat and light that meant nothing to men and everything to horses. A barrier to turn the mass where the pits would have turned them if they hadn't panicked first. They were in the corridor now, driven by instinct and flame. On the ridge, Royce's hand came up. The snow took a breath. The Vale charged. There were men in the north who had not seen heavy cavalry in motion for years, only raiders and hard men on small horses. The thunder of the Vales coming rolled through the ground and into the bones. They fell on Ramsay's right as it tried to reform from chaos, and spears went up too late and shields that might have been walls were still single boards as the impact smashed through. If they had struck a disciplined square, it would have been a question. But this was not a square. It was a brawl in armor. The falcons carved like scythes. Waynwood's riders took the flank. Royce drove men where the fire would catch them if they fought backward or the pits would take them if they fought forward. "Not yet," Jon said when he felt his own riders straining, and the restraint cost him in the throat. He watched until the Bolton center had pulled tight like a knot. He saw Ramsay's banner jerk once and steady and then slide. The Umbers were trying to pull back to the inner line. The Karstarks, angry in persons not in house, pushed toward a gap that wasn't there. "Now!" He lifted Longclaw and the wildlings went forward, not as a flood but as a tide that knows its shoreline, in ranks that surprised even them. The Mormont spears covered the push, punching at men who had been made to lower their guard by panic and pain. Arrows hissed overhead, too few to be a storm but enough to sting. Jon placed himself where his men could see him take the first of the blow and not die from it. He caught a Karstark on his shield and shoved him into the branch of his neighbor's spear and made space there. He moved like winter water around stones, letting fury break against him and not allowing it to own his steps. He passed a man in Bolton colors who had thrown down his sword and was trying to back away without being seen. Jon shouted the word he and Sansa had chosen and made the men know it. Take yield. It was a hard thing to train a man who has known no quarter to accept it, but they had drilled that too. Two wildlings grabbed the Bolton's wrists and turned him toward the rear. One of them growled like an old dog and then spat and grinned when he remembered the new rule. Men do not die who do not have to. The field did not become a slaughter. It became a series of pockets that collapsed and were not pursued beyond sense. The Vale's horses didn't chase broken riders into the bog. They regrouped, came again, and always toward the place where resistance meant choice and not fever. Jon caught sight of Tormund swinging an axe with economical cruelty, and then knocking a man on the helmet with the butt and taking his surrender like a man collecting firewood. He saw Davos step to a rider whose stirrup had caught and cut the leather so the man could free his foot, then take his sword and shove him toward the line of prisoners. Ramsay did not flee. Jon had wondered if he would. Men like that often trust in their horse's speed and their own meanness to cut a path. Ramsay stayed in the fold of his archers and used them like teeth. He put 3 shafts toward Tormund and made the wildling turn his head to grin. He put one toward Jon and Longclaw knocked it off its promise. He was smiling still, but it had turned thin. He was telling himself that the gates would save him. When Jon's men had the field, he did not order a rush against the walls. He let his breath slow and made them do the same. "No ladders," he called. "No fools. We do not climb. We make them choose." He sent Davos with a white flag and a horn to the shadow of the walls, to the place beneath the postern where words could travel. He sent a boy with him to blow the horn. 3 notes, pause, 3 notes again. When the second set of notes had gone into the stone and come back like a bird, a figure appeared on the wall walk. Maester Wolkan, thin and neat even from below. The man leaned to listen, almost as if he wished he could lean all the way and fall. Davos cupped his hands and shouted, "Maester, here offers. All Bolton men who throw down arms will be given bread and water and leave to go with their families tomorrow at dawn. All small folk are safe. All will keep hands and feet. Anyone who touched a Stark with violence, proud or secret, will stand trial. Your lord will face judgment. Do you understand?" Wolkan's reply came thin but steady. "I understand. Tell the garrison," Davos called. "We will hold this offer for 1 hour. After that, we will take the walls and it will be harder to keep hands from slipping." Silence. A hare bolted from beneath the outer wall, startled to find so many men and so much new snow where it had never seen such before. Jon watched the gatehouse. He felt Sansa come to stand at his side. Her face was as expressionless as carved stone. Only her hands gave her away, fists clenched and then unclenched once with careful control. "He has dogs," she said. "If he tries to use them to frighten the garrison into holding, the garrison will hear what he has done with them and wonder how much their obedience will buy him now." Jon did not ask her how she knew. He did not need to. People stood on the walls, small shapes growing larger as more came to look. Jon saw faces he did not know and faces he remembered from the kitchens as a boy. A woman with her hair tucked beneath a kerchief with a habit of scolding bread. A boy who had run messages and once stolen warm pies. He saw a black-haired umbersman with a crooked nose and an expression like a man waiting for a blow. He saw fear turn its face to think of something else. The gate did not open at once. It is not easy to betray the man who can kill you before the next breath. Jon waited and made his men wait and even made Tormund wait, though it took Tormund 2 turns of his patience to hold. Then the gate opened. Not all the way. First a slice the size of a man's body. Then enough for 3 men to walk abreast. Then all of it slow as a throat. Bolton men came out first, without armor, hands raised. Behind them women and boys, stumbling a little because walking from fear into cold air makes the knees odd. Jon had prepared lines to take them. Bread and water were passed. A pot of soup from 3 kettles went hand to hand. Tormund rolled his eyes at the sight of the way they sipped and then, as if offended by their care, ladled more into cups. Vale riders stood by like statues and did not grin because this was a time for keeping faces sober. A few archers on the walls tried to knock as if to prove they were men. The ones next to them put hands on their arms and lowered them before any arrow could find a stupid place. Ramsay was not among them. Jon looked up and saw the flayed man still on the hall. He saw movement at the top of the steps. He saw and only then allowed himself to believe it. A boy between 2 guards, thin but upright, hair like autumn wheat. Rickon. He did not run. He moved as if running would make someone laugh. Sansa made a sound he had never heard from her. Low, strangled, too private to be on a field. Then she was still again, hand on Jon's sleeve hard enough to bruise. "Not yet," she whispered, and he did not know if she meant not yet breathe or not yet move. Wolkan spoke somewhere out of sight, his voice carrying oddly through the gatehouse. There's a tone men use in kitchens when a pot is about to boil over and someone is about to be burned. John heard it now. Whoever held Rickon's arm let go in a way that was not wanting to keep it attached. The boy came down the stairs with Wolken's hand on his shoulder and looked at John with a set face. He was older by the eyes than he had a right to be. "Brother," he said, as if testing the word after a long time. It had edges on it. "Sansa." Sansa went to one knee in the snow so when she reached he did not feel tall. She put her hands on Rickon's face as if she must check the bones before she believed them and then drew him against her. She said nothing. She only breathed into his hair as if she had forgotten how. John lifted his eyes to the hall. Ramsay came at last, alone. He carried no shield. He had a bow slung across his back and he had a smile he had been born to. He walked to the edge of the steps and spread his arms like a man greeting guests to a supper he had not cooked. "Surrender," he called, as if it were a joke he wanted them to tell again. "You have done me a service." The garrison needed thinning. "I prefer loyal men." Sansa stood and looked up. When she spoke like a lady to a household. "Ramsay Bolton," she said, "I call you to answer for treason, murder, rape, and the theft of a name. You have taken the North for a toy. You have fed my people to your dogs. You will come down and be bound." Ramsay tilted his head as if they were playing. "I could put an arrow in your brother's face and begin again," he said pleasantly. John lifted Longclaw until the sun along its edge made a line between him and the man on the steps. "Try," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried in the air that had gone absolutely still. "See how many breaths you can draw afterwards." Ramsay laughed. A small breath in, a larger one out. A thing he did to himself to practice delight. He looked left and right as if to check who might be watching his stagecraft. There were no men who hungered for him now. There were men who had sat across from him and discovered what it is to survive his company, and they did not care to see the trick again. He saw the gate open and the bread passed and the measured ranks, and even a man like him knows counting when the numbers are against him. He began to talk of terms. Davos did not move. Peter shifted in his saddle as if to ride forward and say something lined with honey, and Royce's hand came up in an unambiguous stop. Ramsay's words thinned and blew away in the cold. He looked at the kennels then as a man looks at a last friend. Sansa's gaze followed his. Her face did not change. John saw the decision happen in her and did not need to hear it to know what it was. "Wolken," Sansa called. The maester's gray head appeared as if conjured. "Send to the kennels. All dogs are to be leashed and kept from meat. All houndsmen will bring their keys to the yard. If any man lets a dog loose, he will be put with it and the gates closed." Wolken bowed and went. If he approved or if he grieved, he did not display it. He took the command like a task to be done before the sun went down. Peter finally found his place. "My lady," he called, smooth as warmed wine. "A spectacle is a blunt ending. Consider the value of a trial in the Great Hall. The memory of justice is as useful as the thing itself." Sansa did not turn her head toward him. "Men will remember that their children were not made to watch a monster's show," she said, as if to herself. And that a Stark did not lie when she offered mercy in exchange for choosing the North. "Mercy?" Ramsay breathed, and he let the word roll once around in his mouth, tasting for mocking. Found nothing to cut its tongue on. "I prefer dogs." Sansa's gaze sharpened. "Not now. Not again." In the end, he did not leap and he did not fight. He came down because there was nowhere to go that did not end in an iron point, and because a man who plays with men's fear has always believed the last moment will break their nerve. He held out his hands as if he courted manacles. John had rope ready before steel because rope does not make a good sound in a hall. Ramsay was bound, and when a few of his last men tried a last small thing, a knife from a sleeve, a slur, they were knocked down and disarmed and kept to live and watch if they dared. The great hall of Winterfell smelled of old smoke and rushes that needed changing and the faintest hint of a long-ago feast. The banners that remained were the ones Sansa had ordered brought up. The gray direwolf not new-sown but mended. A bear with a clawed edge. The trees that had stood this ground before men learned any words for it. The flayed man had been taken down and thrown into the snow to stain it a little before it vanished into melt. Men came in and stood where they ought. Royce held a formal line because men needed to remember that order was a thing with rules. The wildlings stood on the right because they had earned it and because habit does not become respect until gesture makes it so. Davos found himself near the dais because he belonged nowhere and
everywhere.
Peter Baelish drifted toward the shadow of a pillar and smiled like a man who had seen the last page. Sansa stood at the dais and did not sit. Jon stood at her shoulder like a soldier at his post. Rickon sat in a chair with a blanket around his shoulders and tried not to fall asleep. He had tripped once on the flagstones because men forget how to walk when fear leaves their knees. "We will not keep you long," Sansa said, her voice ringing not with some false quartz gilding but with the timber of the hall itself, its stones lending a sound of home. "You all know what has been done. You saw the dead hung like blankets. You saw the words written in blood. You saw houses made to kneel to a boy whose father stole a throne of salt and then handed it to the cruelest hand he could make." Ramsay smiled. It was automatic, the muscles did it without him. "Boy!" Sansa's eyes did not flicker. "I was taught to say Lord even when it choked me," she said. "There are no words here to choke on. Ramsay, you are charged with treason against House Stark, murder of kinsmen and guests, rape, and the keeping of hounds to tear men for sport. You will be executed. Not by your dogs. Not in any spectacle that will haunt the dreams of small folk. You will be hanged at dawn. You are given this night to think on what you are." There was a murmur like wind in rye. Some men looked at one another as if to say, "Is this enough?" Others let out a breath they had been holding not for hours but for years. Jon felt the oddest sensation of relief settle across his shoulders, like a cloak that had been too heavy slipping aside. Ramsay licked his lips as if he had tasted a spice he did not recognize. Those who are made of games do not know what to do without an audience that hates them. He looked at Peter, perhaps because Peter often had a word at such times. Peter met his eye and then lowered it because the word he had this time had no coin. He looked at Jon and then at Sansa. Finally he looked at the space between them, as if a wedge could fit there and he might one day pry it open. When he found nothing to set his knife to, he laughed as a man laughs when a joke dies in his hands. "Hanged," he said softly. "How dull." "It will do," Davos said from where he stood, as if to himself, the way a man might say it will do when a knot is finally tied. And men who had pulled ropes at sea nodded because they knew a good knot when they saw one. They gave Ramsay a cell that had held Stark men who had been drunk and loud as boys. They gave him water and dry straw and a blanket that was not soft. 2 men stood watch who had lost brothers at Moat Cailin and had no reason to pity him and had agreed to hold their hands steady all the same. Jon did not go to look. Sansa did not either. Mercy is sometimes refusing one last conversation. That night, the keep breathed like a woman who has had a sweep through her chambers and thrown out old blankets. Men in the kitchens tied on aprons with a sense of duty that had been missing too long. Fires in the towers were stoked and not starved. Maester Wolkan moved through with an armful of herbs and lent his hands where bruises rose. He examined Rickon in a way that hid fear and asked the questions that made a boy feel seen. He set a bowl of broth in Sansa's hands and said nothing when she did not drink until she had watched her little brother finish his. Jon walked the covered walkways and found snow falling again, delicate, melted on stone into dark damp patches that would dry by morning. Ghost came as if summoned by thought, pale, silent. His red eyes not like blood but like a fire behind ice. He pressed against Jon's leg with a weight Jon hadn't realized he'd missed down to the hip. Jon took that pressure like a man relearning how to stand. Ghost's head turned toward the yard, ears cocked, and then relaxed when it did not find threat there. The chill touched Jon's cheeks and tasted like old days and familiar doors. He found Sansa in the Godswood. The heart tree seemed less a watching thing and more an elder that had stayed alive because winters are long. She stood with her hands clasped and her cloak gathered close. Snowflakes dusted her hair. When he came to beside her, she did not move. "I feared it would be a pyre," she said eventually. "That we would put a match to the past and then spend the rest of our lives cold. It is not. It is a hearth, John. I had forgotten what that looks like. He followed the slow exhale of his breath and watched it disappear. We had the Vale, he said. We had sense we earned the hard way. We had luck. We had the North, she said. We asked the North to be itself, and it decided that it could again. He hesitated and then said the thing he'd been carrying since her first letter had brought light to a place in him he had not named. I did not ask you before. I planned to be brave, and I planned badly because I did not ask you. I am sorry. She looked at him as if at last the person he had grown into had stopped moving long enough to be measured. You are my brother, she said. Sometimes being my brother will mean leading without me. Sometimes it will mean asking me. Sometimes it will mean my hand will be the one that holds the horse while you put on the saddle. I will not tell you which day is which. You must learn the look of it. He smiled then, small and real. And you will tell me when I look like a fool. You will not need me to, she said. But the edge of her mouth tilting told him she would never let him go too far before pulling him back. In the morning, they took Ramsay from his cell. He walked to the yard between two men and tried to catch the eye of anyone who might want the last show. No one wanted it. He took the steps to the gallows as if climbing a ladder that had gone missing in a dream. When the noose went over his head, he tried to say something. The rope touched his throat and stole it. John did not pull the lever. He did not need to be the hand for every justice. The man who did had lost a son at the Dreadfort and gained nothing here but the knowledge that a weight had shifted. They stood until the rope steadied, and then they cut it and carried the body out and put it where dogs could not find it. Sansa watched and then turned away. Mercy is the way you end a sentence. By midday, bread was baking that smelled like what bread is supposed to smell like. Brown crust, the scent of wheat instead of fear. The kitchens sent out stew to the men who had been enemies yesterday and were simply hungry today. Sansa ordered the larders counted and the flayed man burned. She told Maester Wolkan to send ravens to houses who had watched and waited. Winterfell stands. The wolf is home. The doors are open. Bring your grievances and your bread and your grievances about bread. It will not be perfect. It will be ours. The first to arrive was Lyanna Mormont, fierce as the cold she had been born into, with her dozen men and her eyes that weighed kings. She looked at Jon as if to check he had not grown soft with his victory, and at Sansa as if to check she had not become the sort of lady that would scold a bear. She nodded once and allowed her shoulder to relax. You did not lose men for pride, she said. Good. You will need them later. We will need you too, Jon said, which was the same as promising to ask when he ought. Others came, one by one. Wool and Norei, long and lean, with hands like roots. Hornwoods who had scowled through harvests and smiled through storms. Even a man from the barrows came with dirt still on his boots from digging a kinsman and his mouth ready for an argument. They came not to bend knee in the old way, but to set their names in the keep's book and be listed, and then to stand in the yard with their bowls and realize they had not dreamed the smell. Peter Baelish found Sansa in a gallery and spoke quietly to her, as if they had slipped away from a crowded feast for a tryst. You do not need him to rule, he said. His eyes were very bright. You can sit the high seat and wear a iron and be the North itself. Sansa turned her head and looked out at the yard, where Jon stood with Rickon and Lyanna Mormont and Davos and a dozen nameless men, all gathered around a pot from which steam rose, laughing at something that had nothing to do with victory. Snow fell. Ghost stalked through it with grace. I need the North to be the North, she said. That will take more than me and more than him. It will take what we have learned from both of us. His blood, Baelish began, is not yours to count, Sansa said softly, and for the first time his face showed the thing under the thing, the old smallness salt-bitten by disappointment. Neither is mine. His mouth made a perfect shape and then closed. He bowed, because men always bow when they must mask fury, and left her there to her view. He would not go quickly. Men like him never do. He would drift through the castle like smoke until the wind found him. That night, Jon went to the crypt and lit a torch and stood before a stone man with a sour look forever carved into his face. Eddard Stark did not look back at him. That would have been a kind of magic no god he knew would do him. Jon spoke to the stone anyway. "We took it without making a mound for the field," he said. "We saved Rickon. We did not feed the dogs. We chose the simple rope and the difficult mercy. I did not disgrace you." The torch crackled. Somewhere far above, snow tapped like fingers at a window. He put the torch on the bracket and stood with his hands to the flame until it warmed the skin and not the blood. He stood there a long time. When he climbed back up, his bones felt as if something had been washed from them. Sansa slept that night with the door of her old chamber open to the corridor because old fears die slowly, and because she wanted to hear the keep's noises, to know if they were the right ones. She woke once in the dark when Rickon cried out and was quiet again. She woke once when the wind banged a shutter and lay with her eyes open, counting, until she was sure it would not be a hand with a knife. She slept after. In the morning she walked the wall and looked out over fields that would need seed and men who would need work and a world that would be full. She stood in the snow and let it gather at the shoulders of her cloak. Jon joined her with 2 cups of something warm. They stood looking and did not drink at first because it was enough to share the view. Ghost's paw prints came and went beside them, already filling. "Do you remember when we used to look for Father riding up the road?" Sansa asked, not turning. "We thought we would see the first black hair over the hill and then the rest would come." Jon smiled without teeth. "I remember looking for a mother I didn't have and telling myself I was looking for a raven instead. Do you think we can be what they would have been?" "No," Jon said. "We can be us." Sansa took a breath that turned to a cloud and was carried away. "We will lose more later," she said, practical as counting spoons. "We will make mistakes. We will be harsh where we should be soft and soft where we should be hard. But today we did not fall into the cruelty he wanted. We made a trap for cruel men and we did not become them," Jon said. "That will have to be counted as something." They drank the warm thing. It tasted of apples and a faint hint of spice that might have traveled a long road to get there. The sun came out for a heartbeat between clouds and set the snow to glittering. Somewhere below, Lyanna Mormont shouted at a man twice her size and the man laughed and bowed to fate. Somewhere in the yard, a boy fed a dog a piece of bread and the dog took it gently and then lay down in the sun as if sleep had never been dangerous. Somewhere in the hall, Davos paced out the measures for stores and spoke quiet words to a man who had never liked him until this moment when he realized liking isn't what's asked. The ravens flew. The north listened. Winter settled its weight. The doors of Winterfell stood open for the first time in too long, and snow blew in and melted and made the slate dark and then dry. In the Godswood, the red sap slow in the face of the face, and the carved eyes watched without judgment. Whatever came next would come, but they had cut one ugliness from the world without gorging on it, and the place felt larger for it, as if the rooms had grown. A Knight of the Vale passed Jon on the wall and saluted with his lance and then went down the steps with careful footing, and a wildling woman with hair in a rope coiled like a snake shouted after him that he'd spill himself if he didn't watch his feet, and then laughed when he turned his head to grin and almost did. People began to knit into one another's days. That evening, Sansa went to the Great Hall and found the head cook and bent over the ledger and discussed barley. Jon stood in the yard and watched a group of boys that had belonged to the Boltons and now belonged to nobody practice with staves and not break one another's wrists. He put his hand on Rickon's head when the boy passed and then pulled it away because Rickon made a face and because he was not 7 anymore. The pennant of the direwolf lifted in a small wind and stood like something that had been waiting to breathe. The trap had closed on the right neck. The jaws that had been meant for long winter nights and meat too scarce to waste had been repurposed for one necessary bite and then opened to let life through. In time, men would tell the story different ways. How the Vale saved them. How Sansa did. How Jon. How the North in its stubbornness. Stories would settle like snow, soft, a layer over the hard earth. The truth would do what truth does. Stay beneath the drifts, the shape of ground.